Margot, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So tell us about yourself and the Wharton class you took on consumer behavior.
So I'm from Philadelphia. I actually went to a high school called Germantown Friends School here in Philly, and I've lived in Philly most of my life. I've traveled a little bit internationally and studied abroad, and I'm actually in the Wharton and Lauder MBA and Master's program in International Studies. So I'm particularly interested in marketing and marketing across different cultures and different consumer groups. So I decided to take a class with Professor Americus Reed on consumer behavior because I was really interested in the cross-section between psychology and branding and marketing. So in this class, in a traditional class, you might think that you would go to class and have different lectures about topics and learn things by textbooks. But in this class, we actually worked with an outside client. This was a real professional client. It's a national running shoe brand. And they wanted us to take their product, which was running shoes, and find a way to market it more effectively to high school students. So for the entire semester, we worked with the professor and with this company and actually interviewed and worked with a lot of high school students to try to figure out how to position this how to position this shoe brand to appeal to a younger market, to the high schoolers.
Great, okay. So, and the brand is actually Saucony, the company is Saucony, right?
Yes.
And how did you go about finding high school students to offer feedback about the Saucony brand?
So we reached out to students in a number of different ways. We tried to use some of our personal relationships to get in touch with parents, either of parents that were Wharton professors or people that we knew, and we would reach out to high schools that way. Sometimes we would reach out to the athletic department. And then Wharton actually has a program where they work with high schoolers in West Philly, and so we were actually able to work with some high school students here in West Philadelphia. So overall, it was great because we were able to get a great variety of students from all around Philadelphia, from both private schools and public schools.
So did the students respond well to your brand-related questions? Tell us a little bit about how the process went.
Usually we would start with a group of students, and we always offered them pizza and Gatorade because we had done a little bit of research and we thought that was the best way to get to students. So we would offer them pizza and Gatorade, and at one point the company made some gift certificates available, some discount cards for their sneaker brand. So we would bring along with us a bunch of different sneakers. Some were this particular company's brand, and then we brought along some other brands of shoes, things like Nike and ones that high schoolers have definitely heard of. So usually we would start by addressing the high schoolers and just talking to them a little bit about the importance of what we were doing. And we said that when a company looks to market a shoe directly to a high schooler, they want to learn from that high schooler. So they want to learn not just about what kind of shoes that high schooler wears, but what's called a psychographic profile. So for a high school or scholastic athlete, a psychographic profile would be: what are their interests? What kind of music do they listen to? What kind of rituals do they do to get ready for big games? And what do they do if they win? How do they celebrate? And then what do they do if they lose? So the high schoolers were definitely animated and interested in telling us their own personal stories. And we found that it was very specific. There were some things that as a team people did together, and then there were some things that high schoolers had, their favorite song that they would listen to get psyched up, or their way to sort of focus before the big game. So there was a combination of things that were individual for each individual high schooler and things that were more of kind of a group activity. So that was kind of how we started before we even got into specific brands. Later, we would move into asking them questions that were associative. So what kind of a feeling or attitude or type of personality do you associate with this sneaker? So we might give them a Nike sneaker and say, what does this make you think of? If you have to describe the personality, the person that wears this shoe, what's the person? And they were often very specific answers. So Nike was a person who was athletic and cool and dominant, and New Balance, for example, and I'm sorry to say this, but they were sort of the grandfather taking long walks with the dog. So it was really interesting because the high schoolers had really specific ideas of what different brands kind of meant to them. And without realizing it, they were talking about brand personalities and brand identities. So it was definitely interesting. And the high schoolers had a lot of really good insights.
So this basically constitutes a focus group, right?
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about the use of focus groups in consumer awareness and in brand identity and brand awareness?
Sure. So usually when when a company is trying to either create a brand or understand how their brand is received or pictured or understood in the marketplace, they'll pick a particular cross-section of people. In some cases, it's a specific group. So in this case, it was people, within the ages of, 15 to 18 who were athletes, co-ed, but it could be anything. It could be, mothers of children who are between the ages of 2 and 4. It all depends on what the product is and what they want to learn about the group. So in this case, the company wanted to learn about what high schoolers thought about their product. And a focus group is one of different ways to do that. Other ways might be doing a survey, a written survey, where you send it out to many different people, you ask questions, and people answer those questions according to different feelings they have about brands. But what makes a focus group special is that sometimes there are insights or ideas that come out of people talking to each other. So an interview, a one-on-one interview, is a great way to get, an expert's opinion. Maybe if you were marketing a drug, you would ask a doctor on his opinion of the drug. And maybe if you wanted to know if people preferred Diet Coke or Diet Pepsi, you could send a survey out to thousands of people. But in this case, when you want to get a little bit deeper insights and you want to understand how people function as a group, then you can do a focus group, which is usually around, maybe 6 to 10 people. And in this case, it was often around that number. And there are certain ideas or opinions that sometimes came from people bouncing ideas off of each other. So we would hold a sneaker up and we would say, what do you guys think of this? And one person would say, well, this color is cool, I like this. And another person would say, yeah, but look, the treads on the bottom of that sneaker are too big and this isn't a legitimate running shoe. So you learn that way how people's ideas about brands are not just individual, but are influenced by each other.
So what did you learn about the appeal of the Saucony brand to high school students? What were some of their key insights?
Honestly, high schoolers didn't know a whole lot about the running shoe, which was not a surprise because what we understood about it when we began the project is that this is a shoe that's very popular and very well respected among elite and fitness runners. So an elite runner would be somebody that competes regularly as a runner, and a fitness runner would be somebody that's out there, 3-4 times a week running regularly, cares about what kind of gear they use, pays attention to different brands in terms of their functionality. So Saucony is already a well-respected shoe and very popular in that segment. But we found that a lot of the high schoolers we talked to didn't really have a very specific idea about it. They didn't necessarily have specific associations about, who is the brand personality that Saucony is, mostly because they weren't entirely familiar. Keep in mind, though, that we talked to high school athletes that represented a cross-section of athletes, so football players, soccer players, basketball players. The runners that we talked to, if there was a group, usually the one person or two people in the group that were runners, they had heard of Saucony, maybe they had run with it, and they had kind of a quiet respect for understanding it was a good running shoe. But there definitely wasn't any sort of enthusiasm or excitement about the shoe.
So what do high school students want most from their brand messages? What did you take away from this?
Well, that's a really interesting question. It wasn't necessarily what we expected. When we first talked to the high school students about brands and what brands were popular, we got a lot of response about Nike and Under Armour. And they were two very different appeals. So Nike was an appeal that Nike was popular because it's cool, the advertisements are really cool, and the high schoolers were really specific about Nike ads. So they could quote or imitate an ad that they had recently seen. And they really responded positively to that. So they thought it was cool. They also would go into stores, a Modell's or a Dick's Sporting Goods, and would talk about the experience of walking into that store and saying, yeah, there's a tiny little section over here for, a smaller brand. And then the whole wall is Nike. And there's so much variety. So variety was a really big deal to them too. Being able to have lots of different options for colors and styles was something that captured their attention. So what surprised us was that we thought that maybe high schoolers would be a little suspicious of a big brand like Nike. Nike's a huge company. And we thought that these same high schoolers who sort of have their own individual ways of relating to sports, and athletes, in fact, and really care about sort of the personalization about sports, But then when it came to Nike, they were impressed by its sort of largesse and popularity, and being big and powerful was actually positive. So that was really interesting. Under Armour was perhaps one of the most interesting insights, was that high schoolers felt like if somebody was wearing Under Armour, it made them, and they use this word, legit. So there was something about the importance of authenticity in athletes, that if you showed up to a basketball game and the opposing team walked on and they're all wearing suits, that's another form of, okay, these people mean business. You know, they're here to play, they're serious, they're legit. And it was kind of the same thing with Under Armour. People who wore Under Armour, you know, athletes who wore it were considered legit. And that was something that really resonated with high school students. And that was actually something that we took back to Saucony. And we said, look, you're a company that isn't super well known among high schoolers, and you're not going to be a Nike. And you don't necessarily want to be a Nike, because if you were, then all of your elite runners that respect you because you're this authentic running shoe company are going to start thinking that you're just one of these sort of mass-produced brands. So why not take the message of legitimacy and try to work with that, work with what you already are. So Saucony is a legit running shoe. We knew that high schoolers really responded to this idea of legitimacy and authenticity, and we thought, try to create a brand message around what it means to be an athlete who's legit. And if you really want kids to start paying attention to running shoes, then maybe the way to do that is to create a message and a brand around how running is a legitimate part of being an athlete, or being in physical running condition is somehow makes you more legit as an athlete.
So all this knowledge you're gaining about brands and consumerism as a student, where do you hope to take this in your own future?
Well, the thing that was the best part of this project for me, honestly, was talking to the students. I really enjoyed it. And I liked that their opinions were different than mine. I liked that they surprised me. I liked that I didn't always know what they were going to say. One of the things that really surprised me, for example, was, and I talked about this a little bit with students, personalizing things, but you sort of look at these top athletes that are really popular, and they're the ones that are in commercials, and they're the ones with sponsorship, and you assume that, you know, particularly a high school age male is going to really respond to those athletes, is going to really sort of idolize them. But one of the questions we asked in the focus groups was, what athletes inspire you? And who are the athletes that really motivate you? And when you aspire to be like someone, who is it? And more than one focus group, so these were two completely different focus groups, kids that did not know each other, mentioned the same baseball player. And they mentioned it in the same exact context, which was, this is a baseball player that I look up to because he's this particular position and he's kind of short stature. And, you know, I don't think I'm necessarily going to be the next Babe Ruth. I don't think I'm necessarily going to be the next, you know, famous basketball player, but here's an athlete that I kind of relate to, and I think, you know, maybe if I worked really hard, I might be able to aspire to that. So that was this really exciting thing that was so cool, because you had two completely different kids that didn't know each other saying the same thing about an athlete who's definitely popular, but somewhat of an underdog. They were so excited about this that it made me excited, and it made me particularly excited because it was so cool to see that these high schoolers had really done their research. They were really knowledgeable about these sports, and they were relating to people because they felt a personal connection. And the same question came up with another answer that was even more kind of heartwarming, which was that a lot of them mentioned fellow athletes, teammates. You know, they said, if I have a teammate who plays basketball and I play soccer, but he's really good at basketball, I go watch his games. You know, or just my friends who play really well, they inspire me. And this was an answer we got from kids all across the board. So kids at different schools with different backgrounds, you know, playing different sports, they all said the same thing. And I thought that was really interesting, that here's a group of people that, yes, they respond to big companies like Nike. Yes, advertising is effective on them. If Nike advertises a really cool sneaker, they're going to be excited about that sneaker. But that doesn't mean that all they care about is branding and marketing and messaging. They also care about their friends. And there's a level of integrity and authenticity among high school students that I think is really impressive. That at such a young age, all of these athletes were really focused on what's real to them. not just this sort of picture of what's in the media.
Very interesting. Thank you for joining us, Margot.
Thank you.